Uncovered my husband's affair with our close friend. He saw me as a joke and now plans for a divorce. Since around April, I started noticing changes in my husband. He began refusing my attempts at intimacy almost every time, and even the way he sat on the couch shifted. He would position himself so he was facing away from me, putting this odd barrier between us. It started as these subtle, quiet signals, but it quickly became clear that something was deeply off. The betrayal ran even deeper when I discovered it wasn't just anyone. He was involved with one of our close friends. She had been coming over to my house just weeks before, texting me like everything was normal, pretending to be someone I could lean on. Looking back, every gesture from her feels like a performance, a cruel ruse. I found out the truth in the most gutting way. One night, I rolled over and saw them having a conversation on Snapchat. She told him she wished she could be there to hold him, and he responded by summarizing how I'd tried to seduce him the night before, making a joke of me. That's how I heard them mocking a moment of vulnerability I'd offered. I confronted him immediately, and he admitted it right then and there. His excuse? The stress of quarantine. It almost felt laughable, if it hadn't hurt so much. And even with everything out in the open, he told me he didn't want to work things out. He told me he now thought of me only as a friend, and that was all. Just a friend. I couldn't keep this to myself, so when I told her husband what happened, he confronted her. That's when another piece of the lie fell into place. Apparently, she and my husband had actually kissed back in February. Hearing that, something inside me broke. I realized in that moment I was never going to be enough for him. What stings most is how happy we were, or at least how happy I thought we were. Just the week before they kissed, we celebrated Valentine's Day together. He bought us a nice bottle of wine for our anniversary. We laughed, we played, we were perfect, or that's how it felt to me then. Now, I feel completely lost. We've only been married about a year, and yet he's managed to take so much from me and doesn't even care to try to fix this. He refuses therapy, doesn't want to even talk about working it out. My own house now feels like a prison, haunted by memories of him, every corner echoing with what we used to have. He chose her over me. What hurts even more is that I've been cheated on in every relationship I've ever had. He was supposed to be different. He was supposed to be my forever. Update 1. At the time, it truly felt like my world was crashing down around me. I desperately want to share this update because if someone else out there is fighting through the same darkness, please, believe me, it gets better. You will pick yourself up, and you will become so much better than you can imagine right now. After everything went down, my husband only reached out to talk once, and that was entirely his choice. The conversation barely lasted 5 minutes, and it felt like talking to a robot, cold and mechanical. I've since heard from others that he cries about how he ruined his life, but not once has he offered me an apology or shown me the same remorse. At this point, I honestly don't care anymore. He's still with the other woman. Honestly, good for them, truly. They deserve each other. Sure, sometimes anger still bubbles up, but I no longer mourn what I lost. Now, I'm genuinely excited about the life I'm building for myself. I moved to a small, walkable city and treated myself to my dream apartment. It brings me so much joy just to see how I've decorated it and to live in a place that feels cozy and uniquely mine, instead of in that old, dreary house. Being the breadwinner in the marriage, I always felt guilty wanting to enjoy the benefits of that privilege, things like nice meals or fun outings, because he would make me feel awful about it. But now, since settling here, I've immersed myself in all sorts of foodie adventures, guilt-free. It's honestly the most refreshing feeling in the world. I braved the dating pool again, endured more than a few mediocre app dates, but recently connected with someone who has genuinely made me feel appreciated and desired. We're taking it slow, very slow, but the experience itself has made me realize just how much I have to offer. I absolutely don't have to settle. Therapy has been transformative for me, and I'm honestly so relieved I jumped into it right away. My therapist is proud of me. I'm proud of me. All those months, I viewed being divorced as some kind of personal failure. It wasn't. He failed, not me. Now, I wake up excited each morning, free of that crushing weight on my chest, and I can't remember feeling this happy in years. The holidays, which I expected to be rough, turned out to be surprisingly easy. I spent them with my family, full of joy, and for the first time in so long, I didn't have to compromise a single thing. Update 2. I still can't believe this all happened over 5 years ago. In many ways, it feels like something I experienced in another life entirely. Every now and then, I get messages asking where life took me after everything was blown to pieces, and I thought it might be time to share some insight on what those next few years looked like. How, even when everything falls apart, life can eventually look pretty damn amazing. Here's the good news: if you put in the work, the light at the end of the tunnel is absolutely blinding. So, what happened to my ex-husband? I haven't had any contact with him at all since September of 2020, and I don't go out of my way to keep up with his life. But I do know, amusingly, that he still follows me on Instagram and watches all my stories. Part of me considered blocking him, but honestly, I think the petty part of me enjoys letting him see how full my life is now. He married his affair partner after they had a whoopsie kid, and I'm pretty sure they've had another since then. The twist? They both lost their jobs as teachers. He got her the job at his school, which meant she worked every day, surrounded by people who knew about their affair, and had to relocate to the middle of nowhere. Last I heard, his affair partner was sending his former best friend some unhinged messages about not including them in get-togethers or letting my ex-husband be a groomsman in his wedding. But honestly, they took up enough space in my story. I'm done with that chapter. At the time everything went down, I just made the decision to move to a new city, Richmond, Virginia, and really focus on finding myself, again. That change of scenery was exactly what I needed. I was never built for the suburbs and, moving to this beautiful little city where I can grab a coffee, a pastry, or spend an afternoon browsing a bookstore on foot, it did more for my mental health than even therapy ever could. Eventually, I bought a house, planted my roots, and found a new sense of belonging. Not long after that, I brought home my puppy, a corgi I named Bilbo Baggins. This greasy little chunky guy is truly the love of my life. We go to our local dog park, which, fantastically, has a bar, constantly, and he's even become the leader of his own doggy social group. Kids have never been in my plan, so Bilbo is, in every sense, my child. Of course, life wasn't all sunshine from there. My dad died, my best friend moved across the country, and I haven't been focusing on dating the past couple of years. Friends will say I'm too picky, but I tell them, when you know what it's like to be married to someone who might love you, but doesn't actually like you, you realize it's better not to settle. I might be single, but my life is rich and absorbing. My birthday is coming up this Saturday. I'll spend it in Paris at a Lady Gaga concert. I caught Sabrina Carpenter in Amsterdam, Taylor Swift in Lyon, Springsteen in Edinburgh, Noah Kahn at Fenway Park. Earlier this year, I visited Katmai National Park and watched brown bears fishing in the falls. I have a Dungeons & Dragons group that keeps me laughing, and a vibrant little tribe of people I love. I would never have reached this headspace if I hadn't faced my own patterns in therapy and worked through why I ever settled for my ex in the first place. True story, when we were planning our honeymoon in New Zealand, I had to plan the whole thing, despite him choosing the location. He refused to drive, so we ended up on a guided tour tied to specific departure dates. He kept pretending he couldn't get a day off work that we needed for the right flight, until I started to cry and begged him to please just ask his boss about it. Turns out, he always had the day off, he just wanted to make sure I was working hard enough to get good flights. And still, I married that man. There was a lot to unpack in therapy. But looking back, I'm grateful for all of it. Without that heartbreak, I wouldn't have built this vibrant life for myself. What happened forced me onto a much happier path, and though I would never wish that pain on anyone, I can honestly say it made me who I am, which is someone genuinely happy and free. If you're in the middle of something awful, unfair, and earth-shattering, please know, this is not forever. I believe in karma a bit more now, but I also know it took a tremendous amount of work to dig myself out of that deep, dark hole. There were times I thought I'd slip back, but by focusing on what lay ahead and staying curious about myself, I clawed my way out. You can too. You are so worth fighting for. Update 3. A few months ago, I was driving back from a weekend in Shenandoah with Bilbo asleep like a little loaf in the passenger seat, and I stopped at a Target off I-95 because he'd chewed his last hedgehog to shreds. I was in the dog aisle, holding the new hedgehog, when I heard someone say my name like a question they didn't want answered. I looked up, and there she was. Older around the eyes, a baby on her hip, another kid trying to climb out of the cart. She looked at me like we were meeting under a spotlight. For a second we just stood there in the kind of silence that rings in your ears. She started talking fast, the way people do when they've rehearsed it 1,000 times and it still won't come out right. She told me they weren't together anymore. He'd cheated again. She said it like someone describing the weather report for a storm no one can stop. I didn't ask with who. I didn't want details. She said she was sorry. Really, truly sorry. It wasn't dramatic. No tears. Just a tired woman trying to hand me something she should have handed me years ago. I didn't feel the triumphant swell I thought I might. I felt a surprising lightness. I told her I hoped she found peace, that I didn't need anything from her, that I was okay. She nodded, the baby started fussing, and we both stood there holding the sharp edge of our own choices. I paid for the hedgehog and walked out into sunlight so bright it felt like a brand new day. On the drive home, Bilbo wedged his face into the crook of my arm like he always does, and I laughed out loud in the car, a ridiculous, giddy sound I don't think I've ever made in a Target parking lot. 2 weeks later, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize at first. It was him. It read like a script someone else had given him. Therapy words, accountability words, a museum of the right phrases. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been doing work. He said he sees it all now. I sat there at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold and realized I wasn't angry, or sad, or even interested. I was just done. I archived it. Then I blocked the address. It wasn't revenge. It was housekeeping, and then I did the one thing I promised myself I would do on my own terms. I went to New Zealand. I booked the flights without crying in an airport bathroom. I rented a tiny car, practiced in an empty parking lot until I could turn left without screaming, and drove with the windows down through the kind of landscapes that look like someone painted them for bragging rights. I ate a steak pie on a curb in Queenstown and got butter on my chin. I took a ferry across water the color of a gemstone and watched the hills slide past like sleeping giants. I stood on a beach on the west coast, just me and the Tasman Sea and a sky big enough to make you religious, and I said out loud, "Look at me." I said it for the version of me who begged him to ask for a day off. I said it for the version who scheduled tours around someone else's limits. I said it because I wanted to hear how happy it sounded. The trip would have ended as a perfect little loop back home, except life decided to remind me it's always going to have twists. A week after I got back, Bilbo jumped off the couch like he was launching himself to Mars and yelped in a way that turned my bones to ice. IVDD is common in corgis, and the emergency vet said we were lucky. The discs were inflamed, not ruptured, but it meant strict crate rest, meds on a schedule that would make a nurse blink, and the kind of vigilance that doesn't leave room for sleep. Community is such a flimsy word until you can't do it all yourself. My friend from Dungeons & Dragons, Matt, who plays a bard and somehow also brings spreadsheets to game night, showed up at midnight with boiled chicken and a heating pad and sat on my living room floor making Bilbo a throne of pillows while I tried to keep my hands from shaking. He came back every night that week to do the 2 a.m. pill so I could sleep. He fixed the latch on the crate when it started sticking. He teased me for arranging Bilbo's meds in rainbow order and then arranged them in a better rainbow. Somewhere between the second week of crate rest and Bilbo deciding the living room rug was safe again, I realized I was looking forward to Matt's knock on my door in a way that made me feel like a teenager about to get caught passing notes. We started taking slow laps around the neighborhood with Bilbo doing his determined little waddle. And one night on the walk back from the dog park bar, he reached for my hand like he'd been doing it in his head for months. I didn't feel fireworks. I felt my whole nervous system sigh. It turns out there's a difference between someone who loves you and someone who likes you and loves that they like you. It's early and easy and gentle in a way that makes me laugh at all the stories I told myself about how complicated it had to be. There have been other small, sparkling things. I finally said yes to doing a reading at a little bookstore here about traveling solo, and a woman hugged me afterward with tears in her eyes and told me she booked her first trip because of me. I painted my kitchen a ridiculous green that looks like a pistachio gelato and somehow makes everything taste better. Bilbo is back to being the undisputed mayor of his dog park, and the bartenders keep a jar of his treats behind the counter labeled Baggins tax. If you're wondering if the past still tries to knock sometimes, it does. It just doesn't have a key anymore. I ran into a ghost in a Target and didn't become one. I drove on the wrong side of the road and made it to where I was going. I came home, and someone I didn't think would ever be part of this story was already there with a heating pad and a dumb joke and hands that know how to hold things gently. Update 4. In June a storm shouldered through Richmond like it had something to prove and the power went out for 3 days. The whole neighborhood turned into a campsite. We hauled everything from the freezer onto the grill and ate like pirates, corn still in its husk, a rogue bag of shrimp I'd forgotten I owned, a cherry pie half-thawed and perfect in that way nothing is when you plan it. Matt showed up wearing a headlamp and carrying his camp stove like a firefighter carries a kid, and by the second night there were extension cords snaking between porches and a running joke about charging fees and popsicles. We played Dungeons & Dragons by candlelight and I watched his face in the flicker as he did terrible accents and kept everyone's hit points neat on a folded napkin. When the lights came back on the house felt louder than usual, like it was cheering, and there was an extra toothbrush by my sink. It wasn't a move-in. It was gravity. Here's what no one tells you. The first drawer you clear out for someone is a love letter with hinges. I made space and he tucked things in as if he were apologizing for their existence, for having needs at all. A hoodie, then a paperback about climbing mountains in the 1970s, then a bag of coffee he swears tastes like dark chocolate and I swear tastes like coffee. He fixed the wobbly leg on my kitchen table and refused money for the part, so I bought him a ridiculous plant mister shaped like a brass bumblebee. We fell into it like stepping off a curb you forgot was there and somehow still landing on your feet. Bilbo had his comeback tour. The Flying Squirrels hosted Bark in the Park and someone in a radio booth decided that a short king sprint during the 5th inning would delight the masses. My corgi, who trains mostly by bullying squeaky toys and holding court by the treat jar at the dog park bar, lined up against a crew of dachshunds and one ambitious Pomeranian. The buzzer went off and Bilbo took 3 heroic strides, then veered 90 degrees to greet a small kid in a foam finger. He sat on the kid's shoes until the kid giggled himself pink, then trotted across the finish line like he was late for a meeting only he understood. He did not win the race but he won the stadium. The announcer said Baggins chooses love, and a stranger bought me a beer. In August, the bookstore where I did that travel reading asked if I'd teach a Sunday workshop on writing about place. I said yes and then immediately panicked and then wrote the syllabus with a pencil because it felt like the right level of commitment. On the first day a man slipped in late and sat in the back and it took me too long to realize I knew him, my ex's former best friend, older in the jawline and wearing the kind of ring that means it stuck. At the break he came up to me with both hands visible like I was a cop and he said, "I should have said something." "I'm sorry I didn't." I said, "Yeah," and he nodded like a person who finally ran out of explanations. He told me he was happy now. I told him I was too. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was putting a book back on the right shelf. There's a picture of me taped to my refrigerator now, from a trip we took to the Outer Banks after the heat broke. It was off-season and the beaches belonged to the wind and the ghosts of horses. I'm wearing 2 sweaters because I refused to admit I needed a coat and I've got my hair pulled into a lopsided knot and Bilbo is mid-bark at a pelican the size of a compact car. Matt took the picture. You can see the corner of his shadow, a little triangle at the edge of the frame like a signature. That night we cooked scallops so fast we burned our mouths and lay on our backs on the deck watching a meteor shower that felt fake, like a cinema sky. He reached over without looking and found my hand by sound. Work shifted under my feet in a way that didn't feel like falling. A piece I wrote about traveling alone, about figuring out the geography inside my own head, got picked up by a magazine with a real masthead. My name appeared in a column where other people's names had always lived. They sent me a proof and a check and a tote bag because of course they did. I took the train to D.C. for a panel and ordered room service fries under a white napkin and ate them in bed watching a movie I've seen 6 times. In the morning I stood at a podium and said words out loud to strangers who nodded at the places I meant them to nod. Matt was in the 3rd row taking notes not because he had to but because he likes to understand the way things fit together. Afterward, on the platform, we missed our train because he got distracted petting a golden retriever named Moose, and I didn't mind, because I liked the way his face looked when he said, Moose. Like it was both a greeting and a thesis. I got a letter in the actual mail from a return address I recognized and almost didn't open. My ex-mother-in-law's handwriting, the same careful loops from holiday cards. Inside was a recipe card for a chocolate cake that I'd loved, smudged with old cocoa fingerprints, and a short, tidy note, thought you might still want this. I'm sorry for my part in not seeing what I should have seen. Be well. There was no forwarding request for my forgiveness and no email address asking to keep in touch. I tucked the card into my cookbook and baked the cake on a Tuesday because it felt like a Tuesday cake. It tasted like birthdays I gave myself. On a Wednesday night that stretched later than Wednesdays usually do, after D&D, after a bar run where someone put ABBA on the jukebox and a stranger complimented my shoes, Matt and I were standing in my kitchen talking about nothing when he reached up and touched the line of paint where pistachio meets ceiling. This is my favorite mistake in your house, he said about a smudge I never fixed, because it proves you live here. He said it and it cracked something open in me I didn't realize was still shut. Without thinking I walked into the hallway and took the spare key off the hook where it's hung since I moved in, the one I've handed to dog sitters and plumbers and nobody with a toothbrush. I put it in his palm and closed his fingers around it. He didn't say anything theatrical. He just slipped it into his wallet like a person tucking away a photo. It wasn't ceremony. It was a hinge clicking into place. Bilbo is sleeping at my feet right now, legs twitching like he's chasing something easy. The treat jar at the bar still says Baggins tax. The plants in the window are thriving despite my negligence. I wake up and there's a second coffee mug in the sink and sometimes there's an extra sock in the dryer that doesn't belong to me and when the pass knocks these days it feels like a delivery to the wrong address. I used to think the plot twist had to be spectacular to count. Turns out it can be a meteor or a melted pie or a key on a Wednesday, and the effect is the same. I keep looking around and recognizing my life. It fits. I fit. Update 5. Richmond sang this spring, not a bird song, an electric, bone-deep chorus that made the sidewalks hum and turned every tree into an amp. The cicadas crawled out of the earth like a magic trick nobody rehearsed, and the first night they really got going I thought someone's car alarm was having a breakdown. Bilbo tried to make diplomacy with them and then tried to eat diplomacy. For 2 weeks my porch was a confetti of wings that looked like discarded party favors, tiny stained glass windows dropped by something that didn't need them anymore. I wrote a piece about it, about the sound of a city wearing its history on the outside, and the magazine ran it with a photo I took of a cicada shell clinging to my fence like a tiny astronaut. A neighbor taped the article to our lamppost and underlined a line about how some things have to dig their way up and out to become themselves. If that was on the nose, I didn't mind. In April, we chased the moon's shadow. Matt had a spreadsheet, of course he did, with gas stops and a sandwich place in Ohio that he refuses to call anything but life-changing, and I packed an absurd number of snacks in a cardboard box with 2 holes punched in it because my 3rd grade science fair self refuses to die. We parked in a field outside a town I'd never heard of with 100 strangers who all knew they were about to watch the same secret. People leaned on their cars passing around welding glasses and Pringles lids like communion. The air went weird before anything looked different, cooler in a way that made my arm hairs stand up, like the room of the world had suddenly been air-conditioned. Then the light thinned, the way it does at the bottom of a swimming pool, and the whole field went quiet the way theaters go quiet before a curtain. When totality hit, the horizon lit up in a 360-degree sunset and people cried like they were at a wedding or the world's softest riot. Matt's hand was on the back of my neck, the warm map of it, and Bilbo tilted his head at the sky with his ears making parentheses. When the sun came back, a woman behind us yelled, "Again." And we all laughed because that was the only thing to do. We ate our sandwiches in a gas station parking lot like royalty who had misplaced their castle. On the way home we found a Waffle House that looked exactly like every Waffle House and I have never been more grateful for sameness. 2 weeks later the Northern Lights took a wrong turn and ended up in Virginia. Someone in the neighborhood group chat typed "Go outside right now" in all caps, and we came out like kids at a sleepover taking dares. The sky was bruise-colored with curtains of pink draped over the houses like someone spilled neon in slow motion. We lay down on the sidewalk with our heads by the curb and our feet pointing at the pistachio kitchen because there wasn't a better place to be. Bilbo barked at the aurora like it had insulted him personally and Matt said moose to the golden retriever down the block like seeing him was part of the event. There are nights you know your block is a chapter in a story. That was one. The next morning someone had chalked little green waves all down the street, and a pair of mismatched kid socks were folded on our stoop like an offering. It turns out love is paperwork. The magazine sent an email that wasn't an email so much as an opening. Do you have a book in you? And I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and said out loud, yes, like I was agreeing to adopt a planet. The proposal was 20 pages that felt like a map I was drawing while walking, and my desk turned into a topographical mess, post-its like confetti, a stack of index cards with verbs, a coffee ring that looks like a small eclipse. I sent it and spent a week convinced the silence was personal. The yes came in on a Tuesday at 3:11 p.m. while I was standing in the produce aisle squeezing avocados, and I did a small, disrespectful dance next to a pyramid of lemons while a stranger pretended not to see me. I called my therapist and my mother and then Matt, who said I knew it, in a voice I did not realize I'd been waiting to hear from someone who lives in my house. We didn't plan to turn his key into a moving van, but that's how it's going. A drawer became 2 drawers. His records arrived in milk crates like they were errant cattle. He hung his one-framed mountain photo next to my messy gallery wall and it looked like a deep breath on a busy street. We had our first argument about the dishwasher, which is really about how people think the world should be loaded. I put bowls in like a raccoon decorating a nest. He is a rack-by-rack structural engineer. We said some dumb, sharp things and then we stood on opposite sides of the sink like warring monarchs while Bilbo lay down between us like a fluffy UN. And then we both started talking at the same time and laughing because there is nothing sillier than 2 kind people trying to win a fight. We made a truce. The truce is that whoever cooks can be a raccoon and whoever cleans can be an engineer and no one gets to use the phrase the right way unless they're talking about left turns in New Zealand. In July we took the ferry out to an island that's losing a battle to the water and ate crab picked by hands that have been doing that motion longer than I've been alive. The streets are stitched together with faith and netting and weather reports, and the man who ran the little store sold me a t-shirt that says Waterman in block letters and told me his granddaughter was moving inland to be an electrician and wasn't that something. We sat on a bench and watched the tide come in like a slow rescue and I took notes that were mostly about the way older men talk to dogs. Bilbo got kissed by a girl with 2 missing front teeth and the kindest eyes I've ever seen, and later that night at the inn I heard the late news through the wall and the word erosion used like it could mean anything beyond the obvious. The bookstore class turned into a monthly salon and somehow I'm the person who shows up early to unlock the back room, the person who has a key to a place where stories live. People bring pages hot and messy and wonderful, and we drink bad coffee and talk about river currents and childhood and the names of birds. A woman reads something about her mother's hands and I had to pretend the air had dust in it. After class, someone taped a flyer to the front window for a Halloween dog parade, and in October we put a little wizard hat on Bilbo and he tolerated it like a saint. He didn't win anything but a handful of liver treats and a dozen new fans. The announcer at the dog park bar has started saying, Baggins returns, in the same tone sports commentators use for home runs. Work got louder. The magazine flew me to Portland for a weekend to sit on a panel about places character, and I got nervous about the phrase craft talk and then stood up anyway and told a room of strangers about my street and its chalk auroras and how sometimes the story is the porch light. On the red-eye home the whole cabin went dark at once and for a second it felt like totality again, and I watched an older couple share an airplane blanket like a small, funny vow. The book is a thing now with a title and a schedule and edits in the margin that say more here, please, like I'm a pantry. My editor's notes feel like a hand on the small of my back steering, not shoving. I have never eaten so many celebration bagels in my life. Bilbo had a scare and then didn't. He misjudged a jump and I felt the bottom drop out of every part of me, but this time it was just a yelp and indignation. He submitted to heat therapy like a Roman emperor and took his pills with the suspicious dignity of someone who has been fooled before. Our friends showed up like they always do, with soup and new squeaky toys and an obscene number of nicknames. There's a photo on my phone from the night he turned the corner, him sprawled on the rug like a crime scene while Matt reads him a paragraph of my book in a voice like an NPR host, and if that's not healing I don't know what is. There is still this random kindness from places I thought were closed. A package showed up with no note and inside was a small, battered field guide to the James River with someone else's pencil marks all down the R for riprap and I don't know how it found me but it did, and now it lives by the door for when we decide to scramble over rocks and pretend we're braver than we are. On a late September night, the power blinked just long enough for the clocks to forget who they were, and when it came back, every light in the house decided to yell at once. Matt walked around turning them off, narrating like a museum guide. Here we have the rare hallway sconce. Observe the kitchen, in the wild. He kissed my temple without not looking. It felt like a language we've learned without realizing we were studying. You want a grand gesture and sometimes you get one, the sky ripping open, the sun taking a breath, a green stain across the stars. Sometimes you get a different kind of crazy, a cicada carcass glued by spider silk to the corner of your mailbox, an email with your name on a contract, the quiet thrill of matching mugs in the sink. Last week I found a cicada shell still clinging to the fence, somehow missed by birds and weather and the broom I use in a fit. It was so light it felt like a lie until I set it on the windowsill above the sink, next to the recipe card with cocoa fingerprints and the corner of a shadow photo from the Outer Banks. It looks at nothing with empty eyes and still, somehow, it looks like a beginning. The porch light is on. There is a stack of pages I get to fix, a dog whose snores sound like a tiny sawmill, a man who keeps leaving his mountain paperback face down on the arm of the couch like it might run away. The aurora won't show up again just because we ask it to. The moon won't always put on a dress for us at noon. But sometimes the strange and holy things find the street you live on, and when they do, you go outside, barefoot, holding a bowl of something you're not ashamed to eat with your hands, and you look up, and you don't miss it. I keep making room. The room keeps filling with exactly the right kind of noise. Update 6. The day the earth bared its throat in Richmond, all the glasses on my open shelving whispered together and Bilbo stared at the floorboards like a magician had just pulled a rabbit out from under them. It wasn't big, just a shiver with opinions, the sort of shake you think you imagined until your neighbor comes into the street barefoot holding a French press and says, "Did you feel that?" We stood in our cul-de-sac in our various pajamas like survivors of a polite haunting. An hour later, my kitchen clock was 5 minutes wrong and I decided to let it be. Something about it felt accurate. A week after the polite haunting, the not polite kind of water showed up. A city pipe beneath our block gave up on doing the same job it had done for decades and the street lifted its shoulders like it was tired of pretending to be flat. The sinkhole didn't swallow a car, which felt like mercy, but our basement made a case for becoming a pond. Matt went to war with a shop vac and determination. I floated Bilbo across the shallow lake on the lid of a storage bin like he was Cleopatra and this was the Nile. Neighbors passed towels down the stairs like we were trying to dry the ocean. We laughed a lot more than made sense because sometimes it's either that or cry. When the water finally remembered where it was supposed to go and the floor turned from mirror to concrete again, we started pulling apart the wall closest to the pipe, soggy, insulation the color of undercooked pancakes. Behind a section of crumbling lath, my hand hit something that wasn't a nail. I pulled out a metal box, dented and smug. Inside, movie stubs from a theater that closed before I was born, a ration book from someone's grandmother, a key to something long gone, and a letter folded so many times it had learned the shape of a square. The paper had gone the color of tea, the ink bled a little, but not so much that I couldn't make out the line that reached through 5 decades and put a hand against my sternum. I am becoming the person who leaves and still loves what she's leaving. Whoever wrote it hadn't signed her name, but she had dated it, October 14, 1971. I pressed my finger to the date like a button. I taped the letter inside the cabinet door with the Cocoa fingerprinted recipe card. Now when I reach for salt, there they both are, 2 women I'll never meet, making room for me anyway. The book stopped being a theory in Microsoft Word and started being a thing I could trip over. Advance copies arrived in a box that thudded like a small animal and I did that embarrassing private dance in my pistachio kitchen, the one where you say, "Oh my God," so many times it turns back into prayer. The cover looks like a map I would happily get lost inside. I took one to the James and let the pages float under my hands, testing them against sunlight and wind like fabric. The launch night at the bookstore smelled like paper and nervous deodorant. We had more chairs than sense and not enough chairs for everyone. People stood in the doorway and propped themselves against cookbooks like pulleys. Bilbo wore a little bow tie that made him look exactly like what he is, a tiny politician with a mandate. Somewhere between my second paragraph and the line about the porch light, the fire alarm coughed itself awake. A rooftop restaurant's fryer 2 doors down made a dramatic bid for attention and the whole block had to be politely reminded to not burn down. We filed out. I held my pages like a picnic and thought that was that, except the sidewalk decided otherwise. Someone dragged a folding table into the middle of the lane and another person brought a battery-powered lantern the size of a cat. And a man in a hat yelled, "We'll hear you just fine," and he was right. I read on a street that knows my dog's name. Cars idled in a standstill like they were audience members who hadn't planned to be, windows down, people listening with their chins in their hands. Between sections I signed books on the hood of a Subaru. A kid brought me a pencil drawing of Bilbo with a speech bubble that said mayor, and I put it in my bag like a passport. When the alarm went quiet and the all-clear shrugged through the block, no one moved at first. We had turned the street into a room. Back at home, my kitchen smelled like bodega flowers and the last of the champagne that had gone flat in the most celebratory way. Matt stood by the counter holding a small square box and I thought for half a second he was about to do the traditional thing until he opened it and there was a compass inside with the glass cracked and the needle steady anyway. "I found it at a flea market in Maine when I was 20 and forgot to give it to anyone," he said, like you could misplace an intention for a decade and still have it work. I looked at the compass and then at the letter taped in the cabinet and this ridiculous thing happened where my mouth went ahead of me. "Should we get married?" I asked, not like a balloon, more like a door. He blinked and then smiled in this way that made me understand that every face has a secret job and has always been to make me feel like the world is reasonable. "Yes," he said, like he was agreeing to a plan that had already been happening to us slowly and then all at once. It wasn't a down on one knee. It wasn't a speech. It was a hinge clicking into place. We ate cake on the counter with 2 forks because there were exactly 2 clean forks left, and Bilbo snored under my stool like a sound machine set to contentment. We didn't tell anyone for 3 days. Not out of superstition, out of the luxury of calling it ours by ourselves. When we did start telling, my mother cried in a way that makes you feel like you're the hero of a very small, very specific novel. My therapist said, "Good," with a smile you can hear through a phone. The D&D group cheered and then immediately started talking about the alignment of our household like it's a character sheet. At the dog park bar someone bought us shots of something that tasted like basil and regret. The bartender taped a note to the treat jar that said Baggins Tax Fund's wedding, and over the next week people stuffed dollar bills under it like we were a cause. We walked down to the courthouse one morning mostly to see what the room looked like where such things happened. The clerk had a cardigan embellished with tiny embroidered bumblebees and the patience of a gardener. Whenever, she said, tapping the calendar, like we were ordering sandwiches. We picked a day a few weeks out that felt like it belonged to us when we said it out loud. He bought a shirt that makes his shoulders look like a plan and I tried on a jumpsuit that made me look like I could fix a radio. On the day, the sky did that clear blue it does between weather systems and my neighbor left a bouquet on our stoop with a note that said, "Go to the thing." We did. The judge's reading voice sounded like NPR at nap time and when he said, "You may," it felt like a green light. That had been read for exactly long enough. We came home with a piece of paper that made everything official and exactly nothing different. We ordered tacos and ate them on the living room floor while Bilbo tried to convince us he had never tasted food and today was his first day as a dog. The next morning, the piano appeared. Someone 2 blocks over was moving out and didn't want the upright anymore, so 3 men with opinions and a dolly ushered it into the space by our front window like they were escorting a reluctant aunt onto a dance floor. It was tuned for the last time probably during a different presidency, but the keys were a map I could wander. That night people drifted in like fog and a woman I only know from her greyhound's name sat down and played Springsteen so tender I could hear Jersey in it. We slow danced in socks on our rug with a coffee table pushed out of the way and it felt like those scenes in movies I used to roll my eyes at because no one's house looks like that and then mine did. The porch lights on our block told each other stories. Someone set a pie to cool and then forgot it and we ate it warm with the kind of spoons you use for soup because we were out of forks again. Work grew teeth and wings in the best way. VCU asked if I'd take a short residency and teach a class on place and memory. I said yes before my cautious brain had time to send a polite email about schedules. My students are walking love letters to this city and the places it made out of them. A bus stop that acts like an oracle, a laundromat that doubles as a choir, a skate park where someone's cousin did a backflip once and that counts as faith. I come home with chalk on my fingers even though we use whiteboards and feel 12 and ancient at the same time. We drove to the county where the letter's postmark came from because I couldn't help myself. It was an hour and a half on roads that still remember wagons, past a silo someone had painted to look like a face that's perpetually delighted to see you. The old post office is a bakery now, of course it is. We ate cinnamon rolls under a bulletin board with notices about missing cats and a lost wedding band and a fish fry. I taped a copy of my launch photo to the board with a note, found in a wall in Richmond, 1971. If you wrote the letter that made me braver, I want you to know it worked. The woman behind the counter read it and touched my wrist and said, "Honey, it always works on someone. Maybe it reaches no one. Maybe it finds exactly one person. Maybe it doesn't matter because the act of leaving a breadcrumb is its own kind of arrival." We did one more big thing that felt small in the exact right way. We put a second collar tag on Bilbo that clinks against the first. The old one says his name and my number. The new one says our last name, the same one now, and the word home. He shakes and the word sings a little. He has begun sleeping at the threshold of whatever room we're in like a guard who's finally gotten the post he applied for. The ramp on the back steps has a string of solar lights along it now, not because he needs them but because I like the way the runway looks. At night, from the bedroom, it's a small constellation doing its job. A meteor didn't fall through our kitchen and I didn't win a prize I didn't enter and the aurora went back to whatever sky it belongs to. An egret did land on our neighbor's roof and stay for a full, baffling minute while the block admired it like an art piece. The James went low enough we could walk out on the rocks and pretend we were braver than we are, and then it rained for 3 days and the river said absolutely not and we nodded because we understand boundaries now. The piano is slightly more in tune than it was and sometimes late at night I catch Matt's hands on it, just finding the same 3 chords like he's reminding the house of our theme song. The cracked compass needle points at our front door no matter where we set it down. The cabinet holds a cake recipe and a sentence that got me here. The porch light is still on. There are rings on the coffee table we don't bother to scold ourselves about. There is a calendar with a day circled that we didn't have to ask anyone for. There is thunder that rolls and dishes that don't load themselves and friends who come through the door without knocking. I keep making room, and the room keeps learning new ways to hold us.